Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Spencer here, back with another video. This is take 4,000,002, trying to get some advice out to you guys to gain those little percentages at your next big tournament so that you can squeak away the win. I've been coughing a lot. I was sick this last week, so if I have to restart again, I'm gonna be pretty sad, but this is the time that's gonna work, surely. I've put my water bottle on my desk, so if I have to take a pause to drink, that's what I'll be doing. Before we get started, I do want to say that I've been doing my QA series, so if you guys have a question for me in the community, write QA in the comments below, and I will get to that in my next video, as I already have 10 prepared, but I am looking forward to seeing your questions. Also, if you're thinking about doing coaching, it's been going really well. I think people are pretty happy with our coaching sessions so far. I've been having some repeats, which is really nice. I've already had over 10 sessions, maybe we're getting closer to 15, and it's been a great time. I only started doing it a few weeks ago, and if you guys want to give it a shot with me, here is the QR code. There will also be a link in the comments below. And yeah, without further ado, let's talk about it. So this video's purpose is to give you guys the little percents that I feel like I take advantage of in my games to win. There are a lot of games that come down to exactly being one card away, and you know that is due to all the little decisions that I've made throughout the game that got me to get that one more card. So up first, we're gonna talk about life. If you guys don't know, Union Arena is all about life. There are three main ways to gain advantage of life. If you've never thought about like this, the main two ways, or the two ways that people usually think about, are attacking and blocking. So when you attack, your opponent takes it, you did a life. If your opponent attacks you, you block it, you saved a life. And then finally, the way that people probably don't think about it as much are triggers. Triggers can also net you life advantage by saving you one or multiple when you should have taken it. And let's go into, triggers first. So I'm not gonna really describe all the triggers to you, but I'm gonna say why they are important right now. So the color trigger, when you're playing against blue and red, you really need to make sure that you're playing around their color triggers, because if you compound that with specials, there are 8 ways for your little guys to be killed. And so if you swing with your little guys first, you are now changing that number from 8 to 4, which, is a lot. That just cut in half. You have now reduced the number of ways that you can not do damage by half, when we're considering those numbers, and that's very significant, especially when you swing and you hit that red color trigger first and your little guy already did damage. It doesn't feel as bad to lose it. Obviously, it still sucks because you've lost a blocker, but now instead of, a 2 life swing with that color trigger, because if you guys catch my drift, if you are able to color trigger an active card, not only did it lose an attack, but it also lost a block on the future turn. So, and if you were planning on blocking with it, and you probably were because it was a little guy, then it's actually a 2 life swing, and you want to minimize those in a game because Union Arena is about luck. So for color triggers, swing with your little guys first. What's actually funny? If you play against green, a lot of green decks are actually playing 2-drop 3Ks, so it also makes sense here to swing with your little guys first. Another cool thing to think about is it's actually kind of okay against yellow color triggers too. So if you swing with your little guys first, they hit a yellow color trigger, they have to rest your big guy. While that seems bad, it's good because now you can block with your little guy against their big guys on the next turn. The one time it's bad is if your big guy was, actually getting you a free block. So if your opponent's board is all small things and your 4K was gonna save you damage, then when you play against yellow, you probably want to swing in the other direction to avoid that. But let's say no matter what, on the next turn, you're going to block them. It again makes sense to swing with your little guys first, instead of the big guys, to play around that. And then, oh my God, wait a minute, guys. Purple color trigger summon something from the grave. And if you're playing against Shadow Army or other decks with big, 2-drops, they can get back a 3K. And then yet again, it is stronger to swing with your little guys. Did I just flip it on the script? All right, so when your opponent has an empty board and you're playing against one of the colors in Union Arena, it's actually usually better to swing with your little guys instead of your bigger guys to maximize damage. I'm actually gonna go into raids now too, because I think this follows the same logic. If your opponent just has a 4K that can come out of life and go on to, their energy and then raid to the front, if you saved your 4K for the end, it can actually contest that. If you save your 5K impact for the end, it can actually contest that. Swinging with impact last against purple decks that can hit their color trigger, that can hit raids out of life, guarantees more damage, over a large spread of games. So not guarantees, but pretty much guarantees more damage. So I don't know if you guys ever think about this, but swing with your little guys first is actually super important. When can I not swing with little guys first? Well, now we're going to talk about active triggers. Probably the number one trigger that you guys need to be playing around at all times. During my coaching, I've actually been telling some people that it's pretty important to know about how many active triggers are in your opponent's deck. If you guys didn't know, there are 8 active triggers in most Union Arena decks, and then some decks deviate that, plus or minus some amount, but 8 is like the average number. However, if you know that Green Jeju Island only has 4 active triggers, or you know that Shadow Army has 12 active triggers, you can start changing your lines a little bit. You also need to know how many active triggers your deck is playing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Let me get some water. I felt the cough coming on. All right, so for your active triggers, it's really important to play around them. So, this is actually another example where we can swing with little guys. Let's say our whole opponent's boards is like 2Ks and I'm playing Shadow Army. I'm going to swing with my small guys first as long as they're bigger than 2K, because then at the end, my Iron or, my Snipe Jinwoo can actually still kill an active trigger target. That's super cool. However, let's say their board is all super big, like bigger than my smallest guys. Then I want to swing with my bigger guys first. And this is the one you guys, I think, already know. You swing with your bigger guy first. That way, when they hit an active, you don't get Omega punished because your small guy would have got blocked. They would hit an active trigger, and they would get to block your big guy anyway, which is super unfortunate. Oh boy. I'm going to be very sad if this one doesn't work out. Okay, so yes, playing around active triggers is probably the number one thing you want to do when you look at life, because like I just said, it's bigger than everything else. When you're considering, losing something very valuable like a key blocker or, so pretty much a big key blocker for next turn, and it's a big thing. Sometimes you want to swing with that first against yellow decks. Against yellow decks, because they have the yellow color trigger to, tap it and take away that key blocker and a special. And if you swing with it, they're, less incentivized to kill it. So that's probably like the one case too, where like swinging with your big guy really matters, because there are 8, if you want to count color triggers and specials, versus around 8 actives. It really depends on the deck, especially when you see these yellow Sakamoto builds. They really vary, but for the most part, they have a certain number. So you just you want to be attacking that and playing to your advantage. And another way you can do that is by actually looking at their sideline, counting up everything up, and seeing what they've used already. Really play the numbers to your advantage. And if you do that, generically, for the most part, you're going to have much better success. The one thing I would say is that if your attacker is incredibly important, in that if it got specialed, you would be incredibly sad, then I think it is probably good to swing with that first, and then when they hit the special, you make them choose, because then if they choose your big guy still, you still get a damage in, and a lot of people don't like taking extra damage, so they special the small guy. But honestly, if your big guy was that important, then it probably really sucks to hit a special no matter what. So for the most part, I try not to play around specials in that way. I try to play around all the other triggers, as there are a lot more than specials. The last thing to talk about is draw triggers. So this one is a lot less obvious, but if your opponent has a really small hand size and a lot of draw triggers in their deck, sometimes it is wise to take a less aggressive approach into your turn, where you don't do as much damage, but you set up for future power. That way you really turn off your opponent's turn. Sometimes you take 2 medium turns and you give your opponent multiple draw triggers, like 2, and all of a sudden they actually have a really big bite back turn because you've given them so many cards. And, going from 1 card to 3 cards in hand is huge. Draw for turn is 4. Now they have a whole turn. I think it's a much bigger difference. When they started their turn with 1 or 2 cards, they have less selection. Sometimes they have to extra draw, and they're only playing 2 things. So sometimes you can slow yourself down, but, not ruining your game in such a way that you're also setting up. So you really do have to play around all of these things and be thinking about them. All right, let's move on before I talk about triggers for the rest of my life. If you want to know more, sign up for coaching. All right, so blocking. All right, so when we think about, remember there's the 3 categories. Yes, it was triggers, it was attacking, and blocking. So blocking is probably the hardest thing in Union Arena to do. After watching, hundreds of games, and just, even playing myself, people do bad blocks pretty much all the time. Even at the top tables of a regional, people are bad blocking. You really need to think about a lot of things when you're blocking. I mean, the first basic thing you need to do is just link up. Don't forget in Union Arena, you can move your cards around. So move your front line around. You can match it up to your opponent if you don't mind giving away how you want to block. And you can kind of see what you have going on. Try to map it out first when your opponent takes their first swing. That way you feel confident. Thing number 2, and something that you can do while you're mapping out the blocks, is really think about your next turn. You need to think about, is this card going to give me value later? That's what I say. So if they have a board of 4 4Ks and you have a 2K and you're you're thinking about whether I want to block or not with this 2K, well, maybe you should probably block with a 2K, because what the heck is it going to do next turn? You know, unless you're coming out the gates, killing a bunch of things, you're turning your 2K into unblockable, you're pumping it really big and you want to trade damage, you might as well just block with the 2K. However, you know, the value later thing really does come in handy. If you don't block with that 2K, could it be a block on the future turn? Or am I playing against a deck that has a lot of removal for little guys and that I might as well just block with it now? Because if I keep it up one more turn, I'm risking it dying for free to some removal effect, and that would be really sad. Another thing I like to think about, and again, it goes back to active triggers, is I really hate taking 1 damage when I'm playing a deck with like 10 plus active triggers. And there are a few decks right now in the meta that are playing 10 plus active triggers. I know you guys maybe aren't seeing your pieces, but relying on a draw trigger when you're playing just as many active triggers is super risky. I like to talk about Shadow Army a lot because that's my main deck, but it plays 12 active triggers and 12 draw triggers. So if you're really looking for like some random card from your deck, you're just as likely to hit an active as in a draw. And so I wouldn't just take 1 damage, because you take 1 damage as an active trigger, you're like, damn, this always happens. Well, could you have blocked that 1 damage? Because if you could have, then that wouldn't have happened. Some people also get this crazy confirmation bias when they take the damage and they hit a special and they're like, wow, I'm so good at taking that damage. Well, probably not, especially if it was 1 damage, because that special would have been even crazier on the next turn when your opponent was probably going to do more than 1 damage. So whenever you can block 1, it's really good. And that applies pretty much to all the color triggers too. You know, hitting a purple color trigger as the last swing doesn't feel as good. Hitting a yellow color trigger, literally all of them, they don't feel as good on the last swing. So when you're only going to take 1, I usually don't. I know a lot of people do because it's just 1 damage, and I know I like, you know, really coming from the Shadow Army reference where I like blocking, but I've actually taken this, you know, mentality to a lot of the decks I've played, and I've seen a lot of success by trying not to take 1 damage, especially when I'm playing a bunch of active triggers in my deck. Now, if I'm playing Jeju Island and I have 30 triggers that add something to my hand and only 4 actives, I'm a lot, you know, more incentivized to take exactly 1 damage, because then I can find more cards and have a more powerful turn on my following turn, you know, and that's completely different. So it really depends on what your deck is trying to do. But for the most part, in many of these Union Arena decks that are playing 8 to 10 active triggers, it just does not feel good to take exactly 1. I think you're going to regret it a lot more than you wouldn't. There's a whole video I could probably do about blocking in general, but for that, I really want to focus on the trigger side of the things. So now let's go into attacking. Cool. So I kind of have prefaced attacking in this entire video. Attacking is really hard when you're not considering triggers. I mean, I guess it's really easy. You just go big to small and you really don't think about it too much, but you guys need to start thinking about it. How can you play around actives the most? How can you play around color triggers the best? You know, it really depends when they have an empty field, a full field. You really need to be playing around the triggers, count them up, see what's most likely to happen, and then take that line. Again, when you do this, it really, really helps. So order does matter when attacking. And then the last thing I kind of want to talk about for attacking is push up versus setup. Some people think when they can push, they should push. And in this meta, it actually probably works out for you most of the time if you just play super aggressive and push up. But I know, and I've seen a lot of people lose because of this. They're like 1 energy short later on, and they didn't really realize that a push up that they did on turn 2 actually made that 1 energy difference. And, you know, the game is one big flowing game. So if you push something up earlier, it definitely made you lose energy later. Being able to set up and push and when you're playing Shadow Army, I think is probably the top 3 reasons why the deck is so hard to play, because it's really, really easy to push up in Shadow Army, but it is not always right. In some matchups, in some settings, in some board states, you kind of want to set up and take the L because you're going to have such powerful turns for the rest of the game. And if you push up too aggressively, you actually ruin your next turn sometimes to a point where they're going to have a huge turn, 2 turns in a row, and you're going to do nothing, and you're going to be wondering what the heck happened to you, okay? For example, you push up, you over push, and you now have bad energy, like you don't have your double established, and you get a couple of damages in. Well, your opponent probably set up the turn before because you're able to double push, and now they're going to have a real turn against you. You go back to your turn, and you probably have to play a double, and then what? Depending on what deck you get, maybe you get 1 raid in, right? It's not going to be that great of a turn, and on the next turn, your opponent's probably still set up. Because again, once you're set up, you're usually set up, and now they're having 2 powerful turns in a row. The life disparity is pretty big. However, I will say there are some matchups where you really do want to push up, because if you can push 2 up, do 2 damage, and then block with those same 2 cards, and then just be up that 2 life in that exact turn, that can feel really good, especially when you have a bunch of raids out of life, because now you're going to set up your energy, you're going to play something, think Yellow Ava, now you have your Misato set up, now maybe you have like 1 Ray in the front line, and sure, your field's kind of open, but now we're playing around so many things, and we have active triggers, we have a Ray for protection, we have our Misato that can summon things, and we're kind of setting ourselves up for the future, and we prevented ourselves from taking any damage before we had the Misato, if that makes sense. Okay, so attacking really matters. Play around triggers, really think about the order, and also don't always assume that pushing is the best thing. Sometimes you need to set up, and if you're asking, Spencer, how do I know when the difference is? It's literally just by playing. Play against the deck, do it both ways, see what's better. I have some people asking me, when is it better to go second in some matchups? Well, if you play against the matchup and you go second and you set up, feel how good those games are. Is it okay if they push up and you take 2 or 3? Are you just so strong after that and they're so weak that those 2 turns of destroying them just really make the difference? That's really just when practice comes in. Man, this video is going longer than I thought. Okay. There are 2 more things I want to talk about for gaining these percents, and it's your deck and your opponent's deck. Okay, so you guys really need to make sure that you are playing to what your deck wants to do. In Shadow Army, which I've mentioned a bunch of times in this video, I want to raid Sung Jin Woo. What do I want to do? Raid Sung Jin Woo. Do I want to swing 15 with Saddle Shoulder? No, that's not what I think about when I sit down. I'm not like, I want to buff my field to infinity and swing with a 10,000 billion BP Shadow Soldier. No. I want to raid Sung Jin Woo. So when I play my Shadow Soldier to the field and I look at 2 cards that are not Sung Jin Woo, I almost always put them in my sideline. All right, you guys need to be doing that for your decks too. You really need to play to your deck's game plan. You like your deck for some reason, right? It does some cool thing. You need to make sure that you're doing that cool thing as often as possible. Sometimes you see like this okay thing and you're like, I guess I'll settle for that. No, don't settle for it. Go for the good thing. Always push it, right? You want to find your good pieces. You want to push it. You want to find them. I cannot stress that enough. If you're playing a deck that has any amount of filtering, you just need to find the things that make your deck good, do them many times, and you will win that game. The next thing you need to realize is your deck has a play style and you have a play style. And you need those things to align while you're playing the deck, unless you have like some crazy thing. So I like being really defensive. Shadow Army allows me to be really defensive, and those play styles really align for me. Now, if I liked being super aggressive, I could also still play Shadow Army in a much more aggressive way, and maybe Beerus would end up finding, a place in my list, and I think I would win less because I don't think the deck wants to be doing that. I think the deck wants to find windows. It wants to take advantage of how defensive it is and how much recursion it has, and then it wants to just explode on the opponent. That is literally what a control deck does, and I really think that it's trying to control. So when you have a matching play style, you either need to adjust to your deck or maybe find a new deck, because it is very important that you are matching up with what your deck wants to do. And like I said, unless you have this crazy line where maybe some the majority of people think it should go one way, but you think it should go the other. If you think you find success in that, that's great. And yeah, the last thing I want to say about playstyle is it's important to adjust it when necessary. Sometimes your opponents get these either super aggressive starts or super slow starts, and I think, being able to adjust your playstyle on the buy and buy, I don't even know words anymore. I guess my brain's dead. And on the flow, on the upbeat, there is definitely a word that I'm not thinking of, and none of those are right. But yes, being able to adjust on the fly, maybe. Bzz. All right, being able to adjust to your opponent's, what's happening to your play style, I think are also super important. And then finally, a thing that I also think is not thought about as much is planning. So a lot of people, they look at their hand and they can make the best turn possible. They've been playing the deck for a long time. They know how to make the best turn possible, but something they might not be thinking about is their following turn. And then players who think they're pretty good will now also be thinking about their next turn too. They're like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then for the next turn, this will be my energy, and I'll do that. But how many of you guys are playing for that third turn? How many of you are like, I'm going to do this on turn 1, do this on turn 2, do this on turn 3? How can you do that in Union Arena? Because you don't even have enough cards to predict it. Well, guess what, guys? You've played your deck a bunch of times. You know the triggers that are in your deck. You can kind of guess and play to what your deck pieces are going to do. I feel like I have won quite a few games playing cards in a certain way that allows me and sets me up for something that I do not even see yet, but I am planning on for that third turn, and I'm trying to, extra draw when I can and finding these exact action point windows so that I'm as efficient as I can be. And if you start playing for that third imaginary turn, you're going to start having much smoother games instead of having, good turn, explosive turn, into awkward turn, into medium turn, into good turn, into explosive turn, because sometimes the games don't even really go that long. And if you can just go good turn, good turn, good turn, it's probably better than good, explosive, bad, right? So just keep that in mind. Planning is super important. And finally, the last slide. I can't believe I'm this far because my voice has just not been doing it. I'm telling you, I've done this like a million times today. Okay, it is important to know, I'm going to jinx it. And I apologize. It's important to know your opponent's deck. Counterplay is huge. So this is a time I'm going to take to talk about specials. I hate playing specials from hand. I know some people love removing stuff, and some people are like, how is Shadow Army good? It doesn't even have any removal. Exactly. That's why the deck is good. It's special, doesn't remove, it summons 2 bodies. It does something that really no other decks do in the game. And it's something that's really strong, and I don't have to remove something on my opponent's field. That's like a triple win for me. Removing cards from your opponent's field really only matters when there's super key pieces that they need to play the game, and Sung Jin Woo kind of already does that anyway. So if you're able to, play your deck without specials, I think that's super important. And just stop relying. If you see a special on top of your deck, just remember that the special is not the reason why your deck is good, because almost every deck has a special that kills. So it's, a couple, but that's not why your deck is good. Sakamoto isn't a good deck because of the special, unless you're doing all the whatever, the special lines. I guess I kind of shot myself in the foot there. But the idea is, unless it's literally the specials playing to your deck's play style, it's not, the end all be all. And really, do not just special because you have it in hand. If your deck is playing a special, when it kills, you can't kill 5Ks any other way besides the special, then maybe save it for that. If you know your opponent needs a bunch of shadow cards on their field in order to make a play, maybe then I can, be less aggressive and then just special random stuff so that my opponent can't raid on the following turn. But otherwise, I hate special, guys. If you ever play against me playing almost any other deck, I'm like discarding them like 90% of the time. I rather just like play my cards better and have better of my turns. And then I know we're talking about your opponent's deck, but it's just good to know when you're allowed to discard your specials and when you think you have to hold them for certain pieces. The next thing I want to talk about is denying value. Can you make lines that make it really hard for your opponent to maximize value out of their things? When I played against, back in the day, I used to play against Green Kaiju versus Kenshin, and it was a very polarized, thoughts where some people thought Green Kaiju is really, really bad into Kenshin, and then I thought it was really, really good into Kenshin, like really good. And one of the things I did when I played against Kenshin is I just actually didn't swing. I would take my 4 drops, tap them, and draw, and I would just kill their board until they kind of had nothing. And then I'll be like, here I go, bam, damage 1,000,000, and they would just die. And I kind of played my games a lot like that. because if you deny Kenshin value, the deck is really hard. They're not really inherently drawing a bunch of things, and they're actually using and discarding and, you know, raiding a million times. They're really negging themselves throughout the entire game. So anytime you are able to kill something, you're getting a 2-for-1, and if you're not attacking them, they're not getting any resources back. So can you find matchups where you're denying value? This was like a hyper-specific example, but there are many, and if you think about it, you know, looking to deny value can be super, super important. For example, you have a special, they have a 4K, they have a 2K raid target. That raid target is Taro Sakamoto, and they have no other Sakamotos anywhere on their field. Well, it could be good to special that Sakamoto, because then, you know, A, they're not going to raid one out of life, and B, if they want to raid on the following turn, they need to play Little Taro and Big Taro. And to do that, that costs 2 cards, and it's a lot less strong than just being able to do it upright. So if you can deny, you know, your opponents some of these little things, it can really come across. And then finally, reading. This is probably one of the hardest things to do in Union Arena if you haven't played the deck. But if you have played the deck and you've played against yourself or your friend a million times, you can start reading what their hand is based on what they're playing. If my opponent plays certain zeros, and I think that there's a better zero they could have played, I now know they don't have it in their hand. And if I know they don't have it in their hand, I know that they don't have 4 of this 0 in their hand, which I've now removed, you know, some ability of them to being able to push up. So I've just taken away a lot of aggression from their hand, potential aggression anyway, that I think is there. If I see my opponent just, you know, playing a lot of stuff in the back row, like they just played a bunch of like they're playing at Shadow Army and they go like 0, 0, 2, 3 and they didn't do any pushing. I'm like, okay, my opponent's hand is like all double energies. Like, how can I abuse this? I can just like go crazy because I know their next turn is gonna be terrible, right? Like so there's just things like that where it's good to think about, where you know it's hard for your opponent to make certain plays because they are playing cards in a certain way that they normally wouldn't, right? If they had like a really clean, smooth curve, they would start playing their cards in a certain order. So the more you just understand matchups and actually play the decks, you can start reading your opponents. And that's why it's actually really important to just get a bunch of games in and play the deck yourself too. Even if you don't think you like it that much, I don't know, now we have a sim, go on the sim, play 10 games, and see how the deck wants to operate, see what the smooth lines feel like, and then all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh, my opponent like didn't do this thing. I know he doesn't have this raid in hand, or I know he doesn't have this 0 or this 1 drop. Like, it just starts happening a lot. You start being able to predict your opponent's hands. You're like, I know he's going to final special next turn because, you know, like, those 2 cards haven't moved, and I just know what's going to happen. Anyway, guys, I hope this was helpful. I think I ended up talking way more than I wanted to, and I apologize for that. But what I don't apologize for is I think this was maybe helpful to someone, and I appreciate you guys watching me. Before I ramble too much, let's just end it here. Thank you so much for watching. As always, peace.